Continuing from the previous part, Chiron's journey was beginning a new chapter. The very next day, he received his uniform for work. In his hands was a large stack of papers. Chiron thought to himself, I understand why they have only one person handling book arrangement. The standard for organizing books has to be consistent. For instance, if I were to organize a book titled The History of Swordsmanship, people would have different opinions on whether it should go under Professional Swordsmanship or Comprehensive History. Another realization Chiron had while experiencing various categorization systems was that all knowledge is interconnected, and the core element that ties them together is history. Knowledge builds on a linear path called history. History is the backbone of knowledge. By thoroughly studying history and using it to reinforce other fields, the speed of learning significantly increases. Out of 10,000 books, about 850 were on history. I will read all of them in my 2 years here to achieve my dream of becoming a mage. He suddenly heard a noise. Chiron couldn't let others see him reading books since he wasn't supposed to do that. The butler walked in and asked, Have you arranged everything properly? Working overtime again? He reminded Chiron, You have a long way to go, so don't wear yourself out too quickly. You must take responsibility for everything you do. Chiron replied, I definitely won't. Before leaving, the butler looked back, suddenly speeding towards Chiron, which startled him. What's happening? Did he catch me reading during overtime? But it turned out the butler was just adjusting Chiron's uniform. He reminded him that in this library, it wasn't just the butler, the family head and young masters also came by, so he should pay attention to his uniform. And make sure not to lower the Ogent family standards. Also, do something about your long hair. Feeling relieved, Chiron thought, I need to focus for the next 2 years. I must be careful and avoid trouble. Should I tie my hair like my father? Yet, burying himself in the library, he constantly felt overwhelmed. His current challenge was remembering the book on the 3 emperors and 7 kingdoms. Just understanding Thormia alone was tough. How can I learn so much? Do I need to memorize everything? No, to access the knowledge in any book, I need to understand each event clearly. Just one more line. But as he read the next sentence, he dozed off. While Chiron was asleep, the butler came in, pulled the book from his hands, and chuckled. Silly boy, holding on to this book for a whole month. Do you think you can succeed just by studying? If you were reading practical books, I would have forbidden you from coming here after hours. Luckily, you're just a determined fool. 3 months had passed since Chiron started working at the Ogent family's mansion. He gradually got used to the sorting work and learned a lot from the supervising maids. One day, a supervisor approached him with a book and said, I'll borrow this book. Seeing the book, Chiron hesitated. Isn't the second young master also borrowing this book? They haven't returned the previous one yet. If it gets lost, it could be troublesome. The supervisor scratched his head and replied, You're right. I've been asking them about it, but they insisted they'd return it themselves. Honestly, nobles don't care about a missing book. Only us stewards have to worry about that. After the supervisor left, Chiron still couldn't feel safe. A noble might act casually, but if they truly cared for the people, it would be different. According to Chiron, nobles rarely remembered the risks common people took. You'll lose your head was a common phrase among nobles. Servants couldn't afford any mistakes, becoming desensitized and cold. Chiron brushed off these depressing thoughts, focusing on living quietly. It didn't matter if nobles cared or not, a quiet life was best. Suddenly, while arranging books, a young man burst through the door. Damn it, that old geezer. Chiron, startled, didn't understand what was happening. The stranger with green hair muttered, No one will mind if I relax a bit on a day like this. Chiron recognized him. The green hair belonged to the son of Count Ogent. Just then, a loud voice called from afar, How dare you run away? When I catch you, you'll run 100 more laps. The green-haired youth panicked, looking for a place to hide. He told Chiron, Don't you dare tell him I'm here, got it? Not paying much attention, Chiron just noted how tall the young man was. Immediately, an old man ran up, shouting, I know you're hiding here. Hey, you there, have you seen a kid as small as a pea with green hair? Stunned, Chiron thought, if that tall kid is as small as a pea, what am I to this old man? He replied, He looks like the youngest master, but who are you, sir? The large old man responded, I'm a swordsmanship teacher, the one allowed to beat that pea-sized brat to a pulp, got it? You'd better tell me, or you'll be in trouble. Chiron nodded, pointing to where the youngest master was hiding under a bookshelf. Hearing this, Rian got angry, but despite his anger, he couldn't avoid being caught by his master. He continuously explained to his master that it was all a misunderstanding. Without much talk, the violent master grabbed Rian by the collar, dragging him as if he were as light as a feather. As he was being dragged, Rian's eyes conveyed a clear message, You'll pay for this. Chiron felt helpless, After all, the master had more authority than the young master, so he had no other choice. According to rumors, Rian was taken to the mountains for a month of training. During that time, Shiren immersed himself in his work. He systematized the first book, which took him 20 days to read. But after fully understanding that first book, he read a total of 82 books in 4 months. As he read, he thought to himself, as I suspected, the beginning is always the hardest part. No book contains entirely new content. If I can build a foundation with the first 200 books, the remaining 650 will be easier to absorb. When Shiren read books on history and the origins of magic, he began to wonder if studying history and the origins of magic was the right choice. However, since he had already learned about the formation of all things, he felt more confident in his decision. If a scholar creates a theorem, they must also implement it in practice. Therefore, a mage is like a scholar. However, not all scholars are mages because they cannot enter the realm of godless perception in their consciousness, which is the field. Hence, Shiren concluded that if he absorbed a large amount of knowledge from these books, he might become a true mage. While Shiren was deep in thought, Rian burst in once again. He had been waiting for this day to exact revenge on Shiren. Shiren had to admire his persistence. Immediately, Rian began to complain to Shiren about the many challenges he had faced, barely escaping death. This was worse than Shiren had anticipated. Rian's anger had reached its peak. Rian repeatedly questioned Shiren, "Do you dare to speak up?" He berated Shiren, saying he couldn't even handle a small task. No matter how Shiren explained, Rian was adamant that Shiren had done it on purpose. In this situation, Shiren felt it was pointless to reason with someone like Rian. "So, what should I do?" he asked. Suddenly, Rian's expression changed. This calm demeanor? What is it? Rian thought. But he decided to teach the trainee butler a lesson. He demanded that Shiren follow him somewhere. Despite the risk, Shiren had no choice but to follow the young master. Soon, they arrived at the training ground. While Shiren was getting ready, a sword came flying at him. Rian declared, "A duel. I am not as cowardly as you." Shiren noticed Rian's eyes had changed, and despite his words, the young master still wanted to fight right then and there. However, it seemed Rian wasn't entirely unfair. He allowed Shiren to strike 3 times first. Shiren was hesitant and worried. "That look, he is undoubtedly an agent. But if I get injured in this fight, I'll lose my dream job." Despite his concerns, Shiren knew he had no choice. He raised his sword, feeling something. His first strike was met with a simple parry from Rian, who easily pushed Shiren back. Brushing aside his irrelevant thoughts, Shiren gripped his sword tightly and prepared for the second strike. But the outcome was the same. Rian remained unscathed and even sneered, "Do you even know how to hold a sword?" Shiren knew he only had one chance left. Slowly, he entered a state of mental clarity, sensing every sound and nuance around him. Rian was slightly taken aback by Shiren's new stance. Without giving Rian a chance to react, Shiren struck with all his might, even as Rian remained arrogant. This final blow shattered Rian's sword entirely. His eyes now showed fear. Triumphant, Shiren thought to himself, "I did it. I felt the opponent's movements with the first strike, timed his response with the second, and executed my plan with the third, the thunder strike I practiced for 3 years." But now, Rian's face was filled with hatred. He demanded to know how Shiren knew swordsmanship. Shiren denied it, explaining, "This isn't swordsmanship, it's just thunderstrike. My father worked in the mountains, and I had to follow him to cut trees. My physique was too weak to chop wood traditionally, so I developed this technique to make the work easier. The woodcutters call it thunderstrike." Rian couldn't believe what he was hearing. A person mastering such a technique just by chopping wood? For someone who has wielded a sword for 15 years, how could a technique be learned merely by chopping wood? The fragments of his sword reminded Rian of a past event. A duel had taken place, and naturally, there was a winner and a loser. His father had praised his older brother, saying, "At just 12 years old, you've mastered the Ogent family's secret technique. I have nothing left to teach you, you've surpassed your peers." Each word of praise for his brother equated to rejection of Rian. These memories made Rian see Shiren as his brother Rai, a shadow he could never surpass. Rian shouted, "I will never let this go." Shiren asked, "Have I upset you, young master?" But who wouldn't be furious after being humiliated by a woodcutter? In an instant, Rian drew another shining sword and tossed it to Shiren, declaring, "Since our weapons are destroyed, the duel isn't over yet. In 1 month, we will fight here with real swords." Hearing this, Shiren felt as if he had been struck by lightning. He sank to his knees, lost in thought. "You could die at the hands of the young master," Rian said, looking at the protagonist. "That's why I'm giving you time. If you're capable of mastering a lethal sword technique just by chopping wood, somehow, you'll manage it." The scene shifts to the next morning. At the library, the protagonist sits with a despondent attitude. He is preoccupied with some discoveries he has made. The members of the Ognet family are known to have two hair colors, black and blue. The head of the family, Bischoff Ogent, has 3 sons and a daughter. The eldest son, with black hair, is a level 6 swordsman, while the eldest daughter, with blue hair, is exceptionally talented as well. She chose music over swordsmanship and is now a musician in the palace. The second son, Ogent Rai, also with black hair, is a genius, but unlike his exceptionally talented siblings, Rian is quite inept. Despite having a personal instructor, everyone in the family is aware of this truth. The protagonist regrets realizing that he has done something unnecessary. He should have let Rian strike him. Now, Chiron has wounded the pride of someone who has always been compared unfavorably to his siblings. If he gives up now, he will officially abandon his dream and insult the young master. Therefore, he is determined to do everything within his power. Meanwhile, Rian is still diligently training. He is trying his hardest to run, which surprises his instructor. Even more surprising is that Rian has surpassed his record. However, Rian suddenly stops and says, "Damn it. What kind of training is this? I can still stand on my 2 legs. Don't you have anything tougher?" The instructor is very curious. Could it be that his brother Rai has said something to him? But the determined look in Rian's eyes makes the instructor more confident in his guess. Meanwhile, Chiron is exploring something new. A mirage, a simple diagram of the human body, a mage with spiritual power, and a swordsman with a schema. Everyone has an image of their own body, but a schema can push their body's limits. Mastering the schema allows for perfect control of every cell. Suddenly, the protagonist pauses. This is the complete opposite of the spiritual field. First, one must sense oneself. This point is quite simple, it's similar to the spiritual field. With the spiritual field, one must erase oneself, but with the schema, one must delve deeply into their existence. Once the black veil is lifted, the schema is complete. However, it will not be effective if Chiron puts all his effort into the schema, something that is undoubtedly the opposite of the spiritual field. Was the girl he met 3 years ago a schema user? Reaching such a high level at a young age, she was truly unbelievable. It would be better to learn some basic sword skills with the foundation of the spiritual field, starting with the 8 directions of slashing. On the other side, the instructor is still very worried about Rian. He is training so hard that his muscles are burning. Yet Rian persists, training until his muscles are torn apart. This madness forces the instructor to stop him. They sit down together to rest and chat. The instructor begins to explain, "Rian, you know, this is why you're not a genius." Hearing this, Rian sulks and turns away. But the instructor continues, "Geniuses know they're geniuses because they know what they're best at. That's why the effort they put in is directed towards honing that skill. When they're confident, they practice it until they can do it perfectly. What real geniuses fear in others is the hard work that achieves the impossible, a burning will that challenges the unattainable. That willpower and determination are the nemesis of geniuses." This makes Rian understand in his way. Perhaps this is the best encouragement he has ever heard. If talent is something he cannot have from the start, he will rise through hard work. This determination strengthens his resolve for the match with the protagonist. But it's not just him who has that resolve. Chiron is also questioning what swordsmanship truly is. It's the process of learning actions that take lives, but its flip side is a high-stakes psychological battle of life and death. Imagining an invisible enemy, it seems like the enemy will attack from many directions. In reality, there are 8 major directions of attack. Within a month, Chiron has trained himself to slash in and counter these 8 directions. He has fought 1 round. Then, subsequent rounds continue in his mind, with each slash becoming more focused. The protagonist begins to feel a strange phenomenon, a deep path drawing him in. He smiles, realizing that this is the path swordsmen have chosen. The world of swordsmanship is as limitless as magic. A month passed in the blink of an eye, and now the moment has arrived. All eyes are on the protagonist. Rian also notices the effort and progress the protagonist has made in just a month. Chiron exudes une unusuelle aura. Rian is astonished by his sword stance. Furthermore, it's the first time Rian has seen someone so calm while holding a real sword. Does Rian truly have talent like his brother Rai? He cannot accept that. Rian is determined to win, he must win. The protagonist is also ready for the battle. However, he has his observations about his opponent. Rian's swordsmanship is excellent, on a different level than his own, but Chiron can sense the direction of the sword. Therefore, when the sword thrusts, the protagonist remains as still as a statue, surprising Rian. Chiron completely observes every sword move, even though they nearly strike him. Of course, it's not that he isn't afraid of death. But the reason for fear is that death lies in the future, and the future has not yet occurred. If one cannot imagine the next step, one can leap into the abyss. Rian realizes that his opponent is not just preparing for death, it seems he has completely mastered his emotions. But it's not just the protagonist who can do this. Rian quickly strikes with a right slash. Chiron promptly blocks it. But it's not just one slash. Rian rapidly performs slashes from all directions, each strike fiercer and faster than the last. Chiron tries his best to defend, but at this rate, he will lose. One misstep and a slash grazes Chiron's chest. Not giving the protagonist a moment to rest, Rian delivers a downward slash, knocking Chiron back. Chiron finds it strange, how could it be? Rian smirks, thinking he has the victory in hand. The protagonist's wound is indeed severe, and Rian believes every slash should break bones and shatter flesh. Chiron still felt strange. If Rian had aimed at his side after attacking his chest, the protagonist would have been cut in half at the ribs. Why does he keep making such big moves? Chiron understood now. Rian's understanding of swordsmanship was lower than he had thought. Rian was proficient with the sword but didn't understand how to use it properly. In that case, Chiron would lower his guard and counterattack. The two swords clashed, creating a fiery battle. This caused Rian to gape. He had thought Chiron was completely exhausted. What was crazier was that these were simple moves. But why couldn't Rian block them? The protagonist's continuous attacks begin to confuse and wear Rian down. That was Chiron's main goal. Rian realized this and, with an agitated voice, yelled, "This can't be happening. I will become the greatest swordsman in the world." With that, Rian charged at Chiron with relentless slashes. The protagonist couldn't understand what his opponent was doing. His tactics were chaotic. Was he even calm? Rian's sword movements were so disordered that Chiron couldn't read them. There were too many directions. Rian was screaming and advancing with his sword. Chiron focused intensely on following his opponent's sword, his eyes seemingly piercing through Rian's spirit. A loud yell echoed, and suddenly, Rian's sword flew out of his hand, signifying his defeat. Chiron was stunned, his mouth agape in disbelief. Rian's eyes, however, showed disappointment in himself rather than anger or blame towards Chiron. Chiron was still overwhelmed by the surprise. Could this be happening? In the final moments, Chiron had changed his grip in an instant and raised his sword. What kind of monster was he to win? However, Chiron was now anxious, unsure of what to do next. Rian was also a noble, and Chiron had once again trampled on his pride. What would Rian do next? But contrary to Chiron's worries, Rian responded with unexpected friendliness. "I've lost. I lost again. You have won. If you decide to kill me, I have nothing to say." Chiron looked at Rian with skepticism. "Do you think I would be safe if I killed you? Why are you saying such ridiculous things, young master? We've fought with our lives on the line, and I admit I've lost." The protagonist dismissed this. "You're the only one who wanted to gamble your life on this. I want to live. From the beginning, I found this duel ridiculous. Why do you blame me when you were the one avoiding training?" Rian, feeling chastised, showed discomfort. Chiron continued to vent his frustrations. "Have you ever considered how difficult you've made things for me? I've been caught between the head of the family's son and your swordsmanship teacher. If you were truly worthy of respect, you wouldn't put your servants in such situations. Do you think a truly respectable person would confront their swordsmanship teacher head-on with such resolve?" Rian began to reflect on these words and fell silent. Chiron, still sitting on the ground, sighed, "I thought I was going to die." Rian's view of Chiron began to change. He no longer felt the same disdain. He wondered, isn't it normal after a duel to praise and encourage your opponent? Where did that cold warrior I just faced go? Rian realized that Chiron must be a genius, but unlike his brother Rai, Chiron did not mock him. Instead, he fought with all his strength. This revelation dissolved Rian's hatred. He asked, "What's your name?" "I am Aryan Chiron." "And I am Ogent Rian." Chiron was surprised. Did Rian just state his full name? Rian then extended an offer, "Shall we be friends?" The scene shifts to the next morning. Inside the library, the atmosphere was bustling with activity. The old butler praised Chiron, "You've sorted 7,028 out of 10,053 books so far." Receiving this compliment, Chiron beamed with a bright smile. "Thank you." Chiron had been working at the Great Ogent Library for a year. The number of books left to sort had decreased, so naturally, his efficiency had increased. Moreover, his goal of reading 850 history books was now down to 200. Reading about 3 books a day, he would soon achieve his foundational knowledge dream. Not only that, but he also experienced swordsmanship and understood the essence of fear. It seemed his mental endurance had also improved. But more importantly, nothing compared to finding a good friend. That friend was likely Rian, who was now browsing through books and marveling at the vast collection. "I wonder if my family has read all of these?" Since befriending Rian, Chiron discovered that despite his imposing appearance, Rian was quite emotional and endearing in many ways. Or perhaps it was typical of the youngest child. Rian tossed a book aside, prompting Chiron to repeatedly remind him, "Don't damage the books. I'd be in big trouble." Rian laughed, "Don't worry. How can a book be worth more than a human life? Even if you burned down the entire library, I would protect you," Rian said, his words making Chiron's head spin. "But why are you here today? What about your training?" Yawning lazily, Rian replied, "I just did the basic training. I told them I wanted to study in the library for a bit." Hearing this, Chiron urged, "Then you should go study quickly. What are you doing here?" 10 minutes later, Rian was still sitting opposite Chiron, not focused on studying. Chiron yelled, "You came here to study, didn't you?" But Rian's response was unrelated. "Didn't you say you wanted to become a mage? Do you need to read so many books for that? 800 books. That's crazy." For Chiron, it was only natural. "I feel like I'm falling behind. Before coming here, I had no chance to study. But after reading 600 history books, I've almost caught up." Rian always looked at Chiron in amazement, wondering how Chiron read so quickly. Moreover, they were the same age, but Chiron seemed much more mature. Suddenly, Rian spoke up, "Ahem, this book is quite interesting. The preface says, surely everyone has at least once asked the question, if a swordsman and a mage faced each other, who would win?" He paused, then said the book became boring. However, Chiron was entirely intrigued by the question and eagerly looked for the author's answer. A voice interrupted, "Of course, the swordsman would win." It was none other than Rai, the young master. Seeing this, Chiron immediately bowed respectfully, greeting him. Rian retorted, "What? How do you know?" Rai touched the book on the table, making Chiron nervous. Had he heard their entire conversation? Rai held the book and stared at Chiron. His thoughts were clear, a servant speaking so casually with nobles would not be easily forgiven. Rian, still curious, asked, "Are you so sure because you are a swordsman yourself?" Rai squinted at his younger brother and replied, half-heartedly, "Why am I so sure? I didn't think you'd be so interested. Look at the status of swordsmen and mages on the continent, and you'll see." Rian objected, "We're talking about combat. What does status have to do with it? People choose their positions on the battlefield based on their army ranks. You don't mean to say such things, do you?" Ignoring his talkative brother, Rai asked Chiron, "What do you think?" Chiron wondered if Rai had an ulterior motive. Chiron had always found Rai hard to read, but now he had even more on his mind. He needed to give the correct answer. Chiron started, "If the swordsman and mage are of equal skill, I think the swordsman would struggle once the mage enters the spiritual realm. However, if the swordsman uses their physical strength to fight before the mage can cast a spell." Before Chiron could finish, Rai interrupted, "No, you're wrong. The mage will lose." This assertion made Chiron feel very uncomfortable. Rian was also annoyed, remembering how Rai always enjoyed trampling on what others valued when he was irritated. Rai sneered, "You must have heard of the five senses gods, right? The ancient artifacts that disrupt the spiritual realm of mages. The natural ability of a mage lies in their spiritual world. Fighting a mage in their spiritual realm is like battling sharks in the deep sea. However, something can stir the waters and distract the sharks, a special technique with immense power. This resistance to magic is what the swordsman can wield. If the spiritual world has no effect, then neither will magic. Once equipped with a holy relic with this property, the mage is powerless." This was still a hypothesis. Magic resistance is a precious power created from the dragon's heart's mana flow. Moreover, because of the frequency of waves, no amount of wealth can enhance their effectiveness. Rai asserted, "Of course, it has historical value too. Each piece is worth as much as the annual budget of an entire kingdom. Because the demand for magic resistance is so high, earning money from it is easy. Mages are lining up to be employed, and there is no need to buy an expensive holy relic. Do you understand now? Mages are just pathetic individuals selling their weaknesses for money." Chiron nodded, "That is indeed the nature of mages." Rai was surprised by Chiron's admission. Chiron explained, "As you said, magic resistance is created by mages to limit magic's power within a restricted area. It exists as a product of intellect for noble purposes. So, I think considering swordsmen more noble than mages because of this is quite one-sided." Hearing this, Rai's demeanor changed completely, his face reflecting annoyance. Seeing his brother's reaction, Rian couldn't help but laugh. Before leaving, Rai shouted, "Theory and practice are very different. No matter what, the truth is that a mage will never defeat a swordsman." After Rai left, both Chiron and Rian laughed, feeling relieved. "I thought things were going to get serious," Chiron said. Rian hugged Chiron and praised him. "Chiron, that was the first time I saw my brother make that face. If your tongue were a sword, you'd be the strongest swordsman in the world. Chiron admitted, it was exhilarating, but Rai was right. Theory and practice are very different. 6 months later, in the butler's room, he was signing a document. When he finished, he took a sip of tea. He couldn't deny that it had been completed faster than he had expected. The old servant, seeing this, also sighed with relief. The plan to relocate the library was pushed up by 6 months. It's a relief that the neglected books from the past 20 years have finally been properly sorted. However, it seems wasteful to lose such a useful person. Should we extend Chiron's contract for some reason to keep him working here? The butler frowned at the servant's overstepping comments. You're talking nonsense. Just focus on your work. Although he said this, the servant's words made the butler ponder deeply. Inside the grand library, Chiron was still flipping through the pages of a book. It felt as though the light of knowledge was illuminating him. For him, reading was easy. However, reading hundreds of books was an entirely different matter, almost like a dream. Finally, as Chiron was sitting in quiet contemplation, a loud voice broke the silence. Rian had arrived at the door. I heard you finished your work. Have you gone home yet? Chiron smiled. There's nothing left to read here, at least not in this section. Suddenly, Chiron brought up a matter with Rian. Rian, before I leave, may I visit your house? Rian was surprised, almost not believing his ears. He had thought Chiron was discreet about their relationship. Soon, they arrived at Rian's residence. Chiron, dressed in common clothes, looked a bit uneasy as they entered. This place feels a bit intimidating. Don't worry. My family won't be back before the afternoon, Rian reassured him. As Rian showed him around, Chiron couldn't help but feel anxious, looking around at the massive gates and thinking, a room here is probably bigger than my entire house. Rian was the young master of a wealthy family, but he wasn't arrogant at all. Rian pointed out, this is my room. Chiron was surprised to see that Rian's bedroom was the smallest room at the end of the hallway. It looked more like a small retreat after training. In the room, sunlight filtered through the windows. Soon, Rian was sweating profusely, while Chiron looked calm but annoyed, unable to contain his frustration. Rian had lost another round and immediately accused Chiron, you're cheating using the spiritual realm, aren't you? But Chiron, with his integrity, would never do that. He explained, you have a habit of arranging your trump cards outside, and it's quite easy to tell when you have a pair or not. Observation skills yield good results. You should observe all your opponent's actions, then you can guess what they are thinking. Just hearing this made Rian's head almost explode. But when Chiron looked over, he saw that Rian had already dozed off. At that moment, Chiron heard the sound of a piano. Hearing this sound, Chiron knew there was only one person in the mansion who could play the piano. The sound came from a room where a green-haired girl was engrossed in playing. The notes echoed from the piano, played by Reina Ogent. She turned and asked, Chiron, how do you like my sonata? Startled, Chiron thought he had been caught and replied softly, it's beautiful, Lady Reina. Reina Ogent looked at him curiously and asked, this is the first time I've seen you. Are you new here? Yes, I've been in charge of sorting books in the library for a year now, Chiron answered. Lady Reina nodded, that's the boy they mentioned. Not everyone can sort books. You must be quite smart. Have you ever played the piano? Chiron reminded himself to stay alert. She was an expert who used schematics while performing, so he chose to answer, no, I haven't. Chiron remembered Rian mentioning that the worst person in the mansion was his sister. Lady Reina gently made space for Chiron, saying, let me teach you then. Come here. Chiron was stunned, you want me to sit there? Lady Reina nodded and reassured him, it's okay. I've given permission, so no one will blame you. Feeling very awkward, Chiron had no choice but to comply. After all, it wasn't every day he had the chance to sit before a piano. Lady Reina began to teach him the keys and the symbols on the sheet music. The sound that came from the piano amazed Chiron. He hesitantly asked, I'm sorry if I'm asking too much, but can I try playing? Seeing his hesitation, Reina couldn't refuse. Chiron's hands trembled as he played the piano. It probably wouldn't sound great, but Reina said, that's how everyone starts. Suddenly, hearing the music, Reina began to see Chiron in a new light. He seemed to know more about music theory than she had just taught him. Chiron's hands moved across the keys, producing sounds that became more and more complete, forming an actual piece of music. This left Reina astonished. Even though he played some wrong notes, he did so without hesitation, as if he could perfectly mimic the feeling of the music she had just played. Focusing more, Chiron used his eyes to enter a spiritual realm, fully appreciating the sound. His hands continued to move across the keys with increasing accuracy. Reina noticed that the notes started to sound more precise. It seemed Chiron was using his spiritual realm to enhance the music. It wasn't just a performance, but it made her curious. How could this boy be just a servant? Moreover, he had the demeanor of a noble. Chiron shyly apologized, I'm sorry. Before he could say more, Rian burst in, shouting, don't be so loud, you annoying witch. When you come home, just relax. Why are you causing such a ruckus? Suddenly, Rian saw Chiron and was surprised. Reina was equally shocked. Do you two know each other? Panicked, Chiron immediately denied it, worried that his friendship with Rian would be exposed. Rian, however, responded, this is Chiron. He's my friend. Hearing this, Chiron knelt in a panic, feeling as if he was about to die. Rian reassured him, don't worry. Reina has a difficult personality, but she doesn't care about those things. Reina helped Chiron up and asked, so your name is Chiron? Don't worry. If Rian says you're friends, then it's fine. My brother can be annoying, but he is responsible for his words. The logic of 16 years had completely collapsed. The protagonist was genuinely wondering, does she not mind her brother befriending a commoner? Next, the protagonist asks Rian a question. Why did you lie about your sister? She's a kind and beautiful lady. However, Rian whispered back to the protagonist, don't be fooled by her. She's a witch. Who knows when she'll cling to you and devour you? Reina also whispered into the protagonist's ear, sorry about my childish brother. I'm glad he has you as a friend. Please look after him. The protagonist nodded. It's nothing. I'm the one who's indebted to him. Oh my, you're quite adorable, Reina said, causing Rian to smile. Adorable, huh? Why don't you just keep him and let him join our family? Rian joked, grabbing Rian by the collar despite his babbling. The siblings continued to argue, giving the protagonist more insight into the lives of nobles. After their argument, Rian loudly asked his sister, why are you home? You just took a break not long ago. Reina slowly replied, don't you know? Rai is preparing for the examination. I came to pick him up. Hearing this, Rian's expression changed. Is it that close already? The protagonist suddenly became interested in the examination. The certification was a standard and requirement for mages and swordsmen to be recognized not just in the kingdom but across the continent. Over 1,000 people took the test each year, but no more than 30 succeeded. Reina patted Rian's head and said, get ready for dinner. It's seafood from the royal palace, so I need to prepare it myself. She then turned to the protagonist, it was nice meeting you, Chiron. See you next time. Unconsciously, the protagonist replies, yes, have a good day. Will I have another chance to see her? Because the protagonist would be leaving the mansion tomorrow. Suddenly, Chiron asked Rian, does your sister have a lover? Hearing this question, Rian froze, causing the protagonist to feel embarrassed. It's nothing, Chiron said quickly. But Rian grinned mischievously. The protagonist kept explaining, I was just curious. Forget I asked. However, Rian quickly ran off to report to his sister, causing the protagonist to feel hopeless. Rian shouted from upstairs, hey sis, Chiron wants to know if you have a lover. This question drew the attention of the servants, making Reina slightly embarrassed as she tried to deflect, they're just teasing each other. Don't mind them. She continued with her work, but two men were curiously watching Rian. Is the young master entertaining a guest today? They wondered, soon recognizing the person standing next to Rian. The scene shifts to a frosty morning in a cold, snowy forest. Rian, breathing heavily, looked exhausted. At that moment, a servant ran up to report, Lady Reina requests your immediate return to the mansion. She says Chiron is in danger and might die. Hearing his friend's name, Rian could not sit still any longer. It was likely due to the bond between the young master and Chiron. However, his master stopped him, you cannot go. At the mansion, the master and many servants were gathered, and the protagonist was kneeling on the ground. The head of the family declared, Chiron Arian, you will be executed in this room. Would he survive this cold proclamation? Stay tuned for the next part. Peace.